One of the most cited justifications from the Scottish Government in regards to their so-called climate change policies has been the public outcry from the young people within society. This idea that the young's voices should be centre stage as it's their futures on the line and it's their concerns that we must take seriously. It got me thinking about just what is being taught in Scottish schools with the overhaul of the education in recent years and how it's clearly responsible for the climate hysteria demonstrated by protesting children.
Take the sustainable learning commitments pledged by the government in June of this year. With it being around educating pupils on being responsible citizens of the world, a wide range action plan which has been published to make it easy for schools to cover important global issues such as climate change and a sustainable economy. Going so far as to say, a vision for Scotland in 2030, our learners are committed to the principles of global citizenship, social justice and equity, democratic participation, and living within the ecological limits of our planet.
A lot of what we see today, in fact, can be traced back to the United Nations, who without question have an anti-Western agenda, to put it bluntly, as well as a depopulation agenda to boot, which has been enforced through the multiple sustainable development targets, including so-called climate change. Ted Turner, for example, is on record as wanting to see a drastic population decrease by 5 billion or so. What about good old Bill Gates, who on multiple occasions stresses the need for population decline and states the various ways that this could be achieved, including better education, reproductive rights, and even through vaccinations.
So I ended up stumbling across this. Human rights education, theory and practices. We are currently in the second phase of the UN's World Programme for Human Rights Education. The draft plan of action for this was prepared and subsequently finalised by the Office of the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights in July 2010. The second phase action plan calls for member states to focus on human rights education and training staff involved in higher education for teachers and educators. Governments are asked to report their progress on this action plan, and the Scottish Government's initial response to this was given in 2010. It was clear from the Government's response that some progress had been made in Scotland with regards to human rights. However, there is still much work to be done with regard to raising awareness and in making HRE more explicit both in policy and practice. The key objective of this paper, prepared by BEMIS, the Black and Ethnic Minorities in Scotland, is to provide the analysis and background information of the key concepts and themes around human rights education. Now, the reason that I bring this up is I believe this is all a much earlier version of the now commitment to sustainable learning that we are seeing in practice. Some of the things included within this publication give a bit of insight into just what is being taught in our academia, thanks to the so-called curriculum for excrement, or the curriculum of excellence. United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, or UNESCO, has a long-standing commitment to promoting human rights education and broadly defines it as learning and practice of human rights. The United Nations Commission on Human Rights defines human rights education as a long-term and lifelong process by which all people at all levels of development and all strata of society learn respect for the dignity of others and the means and methods of ensuring that respect in all societies. It significantly contributes to promoting equality and sustainable development, preventing conflict and human rights violations, enhancing participation in democratic processes with a view to developing societies in which all human rights are valued and respected. Highlighting the crucial relation between human rights education and equality, sustainable development and prevention of conflict. In results, the key role played by education in the development of societies is here coupled with core human rights values and global citizenship ethic. This understanding is further developed by Amnesty International's definition of human rights education, not only as a mechanism for the development of respect for human rights, but also as a tool which aims to empower students to defend and claim their rights, which is more of an activist element to it. This brings to the fore even more evidently the element of active citizenship and its connection to human rights education, which is a deliberate, participatory practice aimed at empowering individuals, groups and communities with a goal to build a culture of respect and action in the defence and promotion of human rights. Since the early 90s, both nation states and international organisations such as UNESCO and the Council of Europe have demonstrated a considerable interest in education for democratic citizenship and its link with human rights education, without clearly distinguishing the differences between these two. It seems to be a general assumption that both cover similar grounds, providing children and learners with a human rights background knowledge, but this is often a limited and superficial understanding. Democratic active citizenship is theorised as a vehicle for teaching and learning human rights education. This view proposes an alternative vision of global citizenship where its content and practices are underpinned by human rights and social justice. Hence, whilst human rights education provides a larger framework bringing attention to the responsibilities of nation states towards individuals, education for democratic citizenship focuses on horizontal ties and calls upon an ethical understanding amongst civic society. EDC, also defined as global, cosmopolitan and active, is embedded in social justice, human rights responsibilities as well as action. Following from that, an active and global citizen is someone who is aware of the wider world, respects the values of diversity, is outraged by social injustice, is willing to make the world a more equitable and sustainable place, and who practices at local, national and global levels. The modern shift towards more global conceptions of human society and away from nationally centred ones, has led to an important shift in conceptions of the individual and of individual rights. There is in fact a growing emphasis on the individual as a member of a global society rather than as a national citizen. Thus, the current way of human rights education seems to be a resulting consequence of this shift. Human rights education reflects both this developing emphasis on world citizenship and the strong assumption of personal commitment required for global citizenship. The rise and expansion is the result of several factors such as globalization and the actualities and perceptions of global culture, political and economic interdependence, the expansion of organisation and discourse devoted to human rights, the worldwide expansion of education at all levels. What the fuck, man? Human rights learning at its core is the cultivation of ethical reflection and assessment for the exercise of social responsibility. While education is too often the ingestion of lifeless subject matter through narrowly prescribed procedures, true learning is an organic, vibrant process through which we develop our human identities and capacities. It cannot be bestowed, it must be generated. Human rights learning is a generative process. Education may plant seeds, but it is learning that cultivates the fruit of human and social potential. What the fuck? This view bestows human rights education with a holistic dimension, identifying the ways in which human rights education can cultivate transformative thinking. The goal of human rights learning is the conscientization of the privileged to their implication and responsibility for the systemic and structural violence advocated above as the pedagogy of the privileged. The complement to that goal is the awakening of the vulnerable, not only to awareness of the structural foundations of their oppression, but also and especially to consciousness of themselves as the subjects of rights they may claim on the basis of universal human dignity, the core principle and foundation of all realms of human rights. This extract represents a prime example of how education and the actual process of learning in this case can contribute to social justice. Oh, for fuck's sake. Thus, the transformative politics and thinking inherent in HRE are to be achieved through what has been defined as human rights learning and democratic active citizenship. By saying this, human rights education can instill a vision of a just world, of ethical relations among individuals and communities, essential to overcome violence and balance the power structures. It builds a culture of respect for diversity and equality, and is vital in the transmission of core values of social justice and human dignity. The case for Scotland. According to the Scottish Government's completed questionnaire, Scotland has no national strategy that implements human rights education policy objectives. However, the strategy is currently developed by the Scottish Human Rights Commission. The government indicated that human rights education is part of citizen education, which is identified as an important cross-curricular theme within curriculum for excrement. a new curriculum in Scotland. A new curriculum in Scotland. Just out of the blue, they decided to overhaul the education system. Just out of the blue. Absolute no influence or interference from the outside world. Just of their own accord, decided to overhaul the education, a world-leading education system, and overhaul it with this shit. And is it any wonder now that standards are failing astronomically within Scotland since they've done this, as well as depression and stress levels skyrocketing for teachers who now seem to be part-time teacher, part-time social worker, implementing all this nonsensical rhetoric? This seems a promising position. However, given the abundance of guidelines and timelines provided internationally to implement the human rights education, the status quo appears far behind the scheduled plan, according to the questionnaire, question 33, imagine my shock with that number, which more explicitly aims at investigating actual progress and compliance of governments to the World Programme, New World Order, as to indicate any actions undertaken by your country to ensure that the World Programme is known amongst education officials, teachers, yada yada. By answering this question, the Scottish Government plainly states that in implementing the new curriculum and highlighting the importance of responsible citizenship, there has not been an explicit focus on the World Programme. In March 2010, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Mr. Mike Russell, oh fuck's sake, Michael Russell, in order for Scotland and its people to succeed and flourish in the globalised 21st century in which we live, we must all become and live as global citizens. The concept of global citizenship is firmly embedded across the curriculum for excrement, which is the national curriculum for Scottish schools for learners from age 3 to 18. As such, the concept of global citizenship aims to bring together education for citizenship, international education, and sustainable developments. One of the key principles of developing global citizenship education within the curriculum is to develop learners' understanding of equality and human rights issues and makes links to rights and responsibilities locally, nationally and globally. Amnesty has also provided a free cross-curricular training day in teaching human rights, and in collaboration with the Scottish Human Rights Commission and others is planning to host new human rights training events for teachers to better equip them to teach human rights issues. Still in the sphere of formal education, Education Scotland, formerly Learning and Teaching Scotland, also promotes a rights-based approach and provides significant support to educational units for teaching human rights and active citizenship. Drawing from the valuable resource and toolkit centre of the UN, Education Scotland offers a wide range of downloadable material to teach human rights. With 25% of schools in Scotland now actively involved in working with the UN's Rights Respecting Schools Award, promoting an active understanding of the UN and Scotland's Commissioner for Children and Young People, recently completing a major consultation with young people and children regarding the UN. The other organisation committed to global citizenship is Oxfam. That's good of them. The Oxfam and Scotland Manifesto stating the education for global citizenship, giving children and young people the opportunity to develop critical thinking. That's a fucking joke. About complex global issues that they made issues deliberately. With the Black and Ethnic Minorities in Scotland organisation wishing to outline the following recommendations, with the Scottish Government focusing mainly on formal education in relation to human rights education, BEMIS, along with other NGOs, can support and pair the Government's efforts towards a more holistic approach, such as promoting non-formal education. A more coordinated approach to human rights education and EDC in Scotland is required to rationalise and allocate areas of intervention within the context to optimise the promotion of human rights education at all levels, engaging more significantly with European actors in relation to human rights education, ensuring Scotland plays a key role in the promotion of a human rights culture. All the above require a commitment to human rights education and striving towards a more inclusive, more equal, multicultural Scotland. If vigorously fostered, bringing about a culture shift in approaching equality and social justice, restoring a much needed culture of ethics. Wow. This is a call for civic society, for Scottish Government, public and third sectors to reconsider understandings of human rights education and to embrace its values, and of course embrace those values they went and did. Hence the commitment to sustainable learning. Hence the commitment to the principles of global citizenship, social justice and equity, as well as a multitude of other questionable areas in the academia that have become the new norm, including, of course, the hysteria surrounding climate change.